So the burning question is the BMW R1300Gs still the king? Well, stick around and I'll tell you what I think. The GS is obviously a legend. It's the world's biggest selling bike and has been right at the top in terms of sales and customer satisfaction for the last 4 decades. So who are its challengers? Well, KTM have the 1290 SAS, HarleyDavidson has the Pan America, Ducati has the Multistrada V4S, and Triumph has the Tiger 1200 GT. And they are probably the most direct challengers to the standard GS 1300 model. But what finishing order would I put them in? Well, let's find out. In 5th place for me, it has to be the KTM. All the bikes in this red hot category are impressive, and the KTM is no different. It really has some nice features, and this bike really comes with proper Dakar pedigree. There's probably no better company known for off-road racing success than KTM. And I would say that their bikes are generally the most adventurous if you genuinely want to venture off-road, maybe half the time, and half the time on-road. You know, KTM really know how to make a bike perform off-road, and they also perform pretty well on-road too. Part of the reason for that is they own WP suspension, so all their bikes come very well suspended. So the KTM has a lot going for it, but this category is super red hot. Some things which count against it a little are residual values are never seemingly the strongest, even when you have local KTM dealers. And although it's very subjective, I meet a number of KTM owners that bemoan reliability or general build quality on their bikes. It used to be much more of a problem many years ago, in the same way it was for Ducati, and modern KTMs are much better built and much more reliable, but it's just still, you know, a question mark in many people's minds. So I put it down here as a kind of, you know, opportunity for improvement. And finally, I'd say, you know, the competition is just so red hot right now that it's hard for the KTM to shine. It wasn't refreshed all that long ago, and it has many redeeming features, but this is a tough crowd to please. So for me personally and my usage, the KTM comes in 5th place. In 4th place, it's the Harley-Davidson Pan America. Now there's a lot of things to like about this bike, particularly on launch. It has hydraulic lifters, so the valves never need adjusting, so you'll never pay for an expensive valve adjustment service. In addition, they were the first to bring in electronic suspension that automatically lowers at the rear, which means that when you come to a standstill or at low speeds around town, the rear preload is running at minimum. So if you're a bit height challenged, you can get your feet down firmly, and even if you're not, if you stop and it's off camber and you put your foot down a pothole, chances are you'll be able to keep the bike upright, and that's a very good thing on these tall and heavy bikes. Finally, particularly for those in North America, the dealer network is extensive. If you do happen to have a problem, you're probably not too far from a Harley-Davidson dealership. On the not so positive side of things, the Harley needs more frequent servicing, and some of the bikes in this class can manage 10,000 miles between servicing, and 9,000 is probably the norm. So for a long distance cross-country adventure bike, you don't really want to be servicing it too frequently. I also think this bike lacks a little refinement. In some ways that gives it a little bit of character. It's a bit more raw-edged, but you can kind of tell that it is their first version of this big bike, because it's still a little rough around the edges, and the engine still sounds a little bit gruff. So it just lacks that long-term R&D, but I'm sure they will get there. Finally, it's got a face that, well, is challenging for many. Some really like the fact that it's very different and the looks do tend to grow on you, but most people kind of think it's a little bit like the ugly stepchild. It really has a kind of pretty decent silhouette from the sides and the back, but the front is, well, let's just say it divides opinions and leave it at that. In 3rd place is the Triumph Tiger 1200 GT. It's a very well-rounded bike, and for me personally, having owned most of the bikes in this group, I would say that it is the most comfortable to ride. Its seat is firm yet soft, but the suspension is also, also complements it. And so on a long journey, particularly with its good wind protection, I think comfort scores very highly. The next thing is low maintenance. This bike has 10,000 mile service intervals and it has shaft drive. And if you want to do big miles, they're two really nice features to have. The final pro is the triple engine itself. It's got ample horsepower, it's very smooth, it fuels well, it has decent torque, and it's characterful. It sounds really nice. In short, it's a triple treat. But I've owned a Triumph Tiger, and in fact I've owned 3 Triumph Tigers, including the current model. And not all that glitters is gold, even though it is a fabulous bike. One notable thing is, even though it's better than the older models, it is still quite top heavy, and particularly if you have the models such as the Rally with the big 8-gallon tank, it's carrying a lot of weight high up. And that is definitely noticeable at very low speeds, and particularly when pushing it about your driveway or trying to get it on and off the centre stand, for instance. So it's a little bit top heavy. It's not horrendous, but it is notable compared with some of its peers. The next thing is its dashboard. Its dashboard is incredibly slow. It's the slowest in the group by far to boot up when you start the bike, and slow to connect to your devices. And then in addition, typical of many Triumph displays, the key information that we really want to know, such as range remaining, the current time and ambient temperature, is always super small font, hidden away somewhere in a menu, and other information that's a bit superfluous is suddenly right in your face and really big, loud and proud. It's a generic problem that Triumph really need to sort out, and I see a lot written online about it, but not much change in terms of dashboards for Triumph. I hope they change and move to a more Ducati stroke BMW style dashboard moving forwards, but the overall sum of its parts means it's a great bike despite that particular problem. And when it comes to problems, generally the Triumph Tiger I understand is very reliable, but my bike specifically had a problem with the key fob. I changed the battery on day one in the key fob because it wasn't always recognizing it when I turned the bike on, and throughout ownership, very often on most rides I'd stop, I'd turn the bike off, turn it on again, it wouldn't recognize the key fob. Now, key fob on the Triumph you can actually physically turn off and on, and I was having to turn it off and back on again before the bike would recognise it for about 50% of the time. It would then recognise it 100% of the time, just turn it off and back on again. So it's kind of a bit of a workaround and a minor inconvenience, but it really shouldn't have done it. It's kind of like turning off Bluetooth on your phone, Bluetooth back on, suddenly it will make the connection with the device you want. And I found it very frustrating. I even had all my keys rekeyed by my dealership, and my dealership offered to reach out to the technical rep 2 or 3 times to try and find out what the source of the problem was. However, they never did that and never got back to me, so I was never able to identify the root cause of the problem. So maybe just a one-off problem with my particular bike, but noteworthy as we're going through the best of the best here. In the number 2 spot, it is the Ducati Multistrada V4S. It's a motorcycle that I currently own. It's a motorcycle that I've owned before. There was something special about Ducati V4s, and I've owned a number of them so far, and they just make for a great all-round package. One thing that's always noteworthy is within this all-rounder, adventure tourer category, it's very difficult to make the bikes look pretty, but on balance, most people would agree that, the Ducati sure is pretty compared with its peers. There are some typical Italian flair, some really nice features in terms of its aesthetics that just make it pop a little and just is pleasing to the eyes each time you open the garage door. The next thing is that V4. There's something special about Ducati V4s, and this is no exception. It really likes to spin up, and particularly in the upper mid-range and the top end, it develops its own kind of howl, and it really performs very, very well. It's the most powerful bike in the group at 170 horsepower. So you do have to rev it. There's a lot of the meat is up at the top end, but when you do, it does reward you like a sport bike. So if you like pushing your bike as though it's a sports bike, but you still want upright comfort, the Ducati may be for you. So almost inevitably, number one, I think, is the BMW. But why do I think it appeals to more people more of the time? Well, let's look at the extensive rework that they've done and look at just three key things of the many that pop out at me immediately. One is it's been on a big weight loss diet. I know it's apples and pears, but if you compare it with, say, a 1250 GSA and the 1300 GS now, you're looking at a 70-pound weight difference. That's huge. That's something like, 35 kilos or something like that. Additionally, it now has the most torque in the group, which I think it always did, but it produces it at even lower revs. It's something like 6,700 revs for 149 Newton meters of torque. So that has all its go low down. It's almost electric in its power delivery, and that makes more sense for more people for more of the time. It's also got the best residual values for many reasons. For one, it's a legend. Two, it's kind of reliable. And three, you can get loads of aftermarket parts for it. And four, it's just a very desirable bike. It is the world's best selling bike after all. So it's perfect, right? Not quite. There were a couple of things that were missing. The main one, I think, is that it's a very reliable bike, that Boxer power plant. I mean, they've been making it for 100 years, quite literally. So if any engine ought to be reliable by now, it's that. And yet the service intervals are still every 6,000 miles, whereas with the KTM Ducati, for instance, it's 9,000. With the Triumph, it's 10,000. And I really feel that they could make it 10,000 miles all day long with a 20,000 mile valve inspection instead of 10,000. And I really feel that all they're doing is trying to appease their existing dealers in terms of making them some money, in terms of servicing. And of course, frequent oil changes, it doesn't harm reliability, does it? But it does push the cost of ownership up for the owners. It's noticeable in terms of how it relates to its peers' service intervals. And in addition, it's bloody annoying when you're on a cross-country trip of maybe 6,000-7,000 miles, knowing that you've got to stop somewhere and get a service. That's just unacceptable. You should be able to get your service done and go coast to coast and get home again before you need another service. So I think definite room for improvement there, BMW. The next thing is a kind of moot point, really. I think everybody expected it to get the 10.2-inch TFT that's on the current RT, for instance, and the K bikes, but it just didn't. It stuck with the 6.5-inch, I think it is. But having said that, I kind of get it, because it's already the best in class, arguably. The Ducati's good, but I think probably the BMW is best, because some of the things that I moaned about the Ducati dash and the Triumph dash in terms of, small numerics for range and time and temperature, like key information you want, they're large and clear and proud on the BMW. And I think for middle-aged eyes that sometimes struggle to see smaller fonts, they get it. And BMW just lay out a nice, clear and crisp TST. So a missed opportunity to knock up to the 10-inch, but of course it does crowd the dashboard, and these days we want our phones up there, our GPSs, and God knows what. So maybe not the end of the world, but if you're going to do something else, it would probably be the 10-inch TFT. Maybe the forthcoming GSA will get that. And finally, it's really so good, it's almost a victim of its own success in terms of its popularity. Some people just like to have something that other people don't have, or is a little bit special, unique, or a little bit more individualist. And if you want that, a GS is not for you. A GS is like owning a Model Y Tesla. It's like the world and his brother either has one or wants one. And you can't go wrong owning one. You just absolutely cannot. But, you know, there's a bit of a Me Too syndrome. So if you want to be unique, don't buy a GS and then go to a bike rally. You'll never find it again in the car park. So meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Is it still king, or is it the new king? Of course it's king, and it's the new king. But why is it? Let's just delve into a few more points before I finish up with this video. So it's important to point out that there's a bike for everybody out there, you know, outside of this genre, but also within this genre, which is the most popular genre globally now. There's really different use cases for everybody, and really only a test ride will validate what's right for you. But we can say off the top of our heads that if you like doing a lot of dirt roads now and then, you probably want the KTM. If you're obsessed with how a bike looks as much as how it rides, and you love the kind of sportiness and exotica side of things, you'll probably want the Ducati. Ducati's always the two-wheel Ferrari of the bike world, right? If you buy with your head, and perhaps you take your partner on cross-country trips and you want practicality, the Tiger is an excellent buy. Great weather protection, great range, reasonable fuel economy, heated everything, comfortable seats, good luggage, and that bike will perform reliably for years, while also being easy to maintain with its long 10,000 mile service intervals and shaft drive. Equally, and particularly if you own a current Harley and you are brand loyal, you might want to have a ride on the Pan America. I've ridden it a couple of times and it's still an excellent bike, and it's surprisingly powerful, surprisingly fast. And I do love the idea of the hydraulic valves and the suspension that will auto lower at the back, which is kudo compared with the Triumph and Ducati, where you have to manually invoke it. So there's a bike for all people and all reasons. So why is the BMW supreme? Why is it still the king? Well, it's a massive reimagination of the existing platform. They have changed the looks and modernised it, but in a lot of ways it still looks very similar, whilst they've changed like 90-95% of the actual bike itself. Of course, giving it more capacity has given it more power and more torque. But BMW aren't just chasing big numbers. They're not just after the most horsepower in the group, for instance. They really want a nice over square engine producing usable power, and that power is very smooth, it's very linear, it's very torquey, fueling is excellent, and coupled with the best low speed handling and balance because of its superior low center of gravity with the pots hanging out in the breeze there, which is also useful for maintenance as well. That just means it's a joy to ride at real world speeds, and that overall means that it's very refined. It really has an air of quality about it and refinement in the way in which it delivers its power. And overall, just that balance, smooth fueling and refinement is nice to own, as is looking at the way in which it's assembled. Its build quality is always sublime. Its switchgear always feels like it would last forever. When you compare it against the KTM can feel very Fisher-Price kid's toy in comparison. And when you're spending the thick end of $30,000, you want it to feel quality, and you should, and the BMW delivers. And it also delivers in terms of reliability. I'm not saying you can't find a horror story out there where a shaft drive has imploded, or somebody's been leaping off buildings on their GS and the frame snapped or something. But you can get that with any bike, and particularly when you sell in massive volumes. They've sold 1 million GSs now. Anybody online that's going to comment on their bike are generally people who moan. So you know, if you've got 1% of problems on a GS, you'll know about it just in terms of the volume that they sell. The auto suspension leveling is a triumph. It's a real coup. Of course, everybody's copied Harley. Kudos to Harley for coming out with what really should have been an obvious upgrade years ago once they moved to electronic suspension. But BMW are the first to do it right. So what do I mean by that? I mean that they automatically lower the suspension at both ends of the bike, not just the rear preload, but the front preload as well. And overall, that means the overall seat height can be lower. The bike is thinner now with a lower over seat height, and coupled with the automatic suspension, which I think below about, I think it's 20 miles an hour, something like that, the suspension will lower down to its lowest height. Now, if you've got the low seat in the low setting, because you can set the seat height still with the under seat adjustment, it will go down to 800 millimeters. That's very, very low. If you've got the high seat on in the high adjustment and you're going at normal speeds, it will run at 900 millimeters. So it's a massive 100 millimeter difference. That really is noticeable, and that's why they don't need a specific low model anymore, because it would just automatically do it. It's also talking to its 6-axis IMU, which is very clever. So it means that if you slow down very slowly and progressively, that suspension will change at a very slow rate and it will be totally imperceptible to the rider. But if you have to do an emergency stop, the IMU knows you're doing an emergency stop. It knows that because it knows how hard you're grabbing the brakes, it knows how hard that engine is decelerating, it knows your pitch and yaw, it knows how much weight transfer is going from the rear to the front, and it knows it needs to change it in a blink of an eye, and it will. And so it's, in theory at least, it has its matrix set up correctly in terms of being able to adjust the bike smoothly and progressively dependent on the nature of what you need, and not having to invoke the suspension lowering at low speeds is just music to the ears of those who are vertically challenged. And also for somebody like me, 6'2", it's still nice, right, when you stop around town to be able to get your feet nice and flat, even if you want to press down and lift your backside off the seat a little bit to promote blood flow on a long ride. It's just all pros, and only BMW have got that right. Next is it's lower, it's lighter, it's leaner, and they're great things, all of those things. It will sit low when you stop, it's the lightest in the class now, it's much thinner to look at and more of a modern looking product, and as Colin Chapman said, light is right, and BMW is starting to take that to heart at long last, and long may that continue. Symmetrical good looks. I don't care what anybody says. Symmetry is beauty. It's attractive, and everybody hated it when they went to asymmetric headlights, and then after a few years they fell in love with them, and now they're all crying because it's gone to a symmetrical look. Personally, I love it. I love the I think they call it matrix headlight. I call it starburst. I think that's probably a better description, where you've got the big light in the center and you've got the four kind of starbursts out to the edge, and they've even done that nicely whereby the top two kind of lean back towards the bike and the bottom two kind of lean forward. So they've probably done that for aerodynamics, but it's a nice touch, and they're very bright as well. So pretty impressed with the way in which they look, and also how bright that illumination is. Couple it with some spotlights and you'll be good to go in terms of car drivers seeing you, hopefully. The other thing is, long time expected coming, it now has active cruise control and it has blind spot monitoring. So Ducati were first to the market with that, with the Multistrada, and believe me, you kind of think you don't need it, and even on a test drive you're like, don't know whether I trust it, don't know whether I'd use it. Trust me, you'll use it everywhere, particularly in traffic zones where you don't want to bust the speed limit, and you can just put cruise control on and just not have a care in the world. And also the Ducati active cruise control, and the BMW one I believe as well, you can change gear. So again, that's particularly nice if you're following cars down country lanes. You've got no opportunity to overtake. Sometimes they're going slow, sometimes they're going fast. You can just, put in a decent speed on the active cruise, and you can just go up and down the box to your heart's content without having to play with any other switchgear or accidentally knock the active cruise off. Blind spot monitoring, not absolutely essential. I would say 100% of the time you still got to do your lifesaver of physically looking over your shoulder when you're changing lanes on a freeway or motorway. But it's still nice to have. There has been at least one occasion with my old Multistrada. I was about to change lanes at about 70 miles an hour. Hadn't seen a car for miles, and I couldn't see anything in my mirrors, and I was lazy and I didn't look over my shoulder, and I went to drift across and it illuminated, and I pulled back and a car went past at the speed of light, and without that I dread to think what might have happened. So we don't like the idea of these nannying devices, and they all cost money and stuff, but it's only going to save your life once, and then it's paid for itself, right? And overall, the GS is a known quantity with the best residual values, and for a lot of people that's very important. A lot of people, this is a life-changing purchase. They've saved for years to buy it. They won't be able to afford to change it for many years. Maybe it's their last bike they'll ever have, and they want the dependency, known quantity, and knowing that they can sell it easily when the time comes, if it's going to be their only bike and for a long-term purchase or possibly last bike purchase. So compared with the others, sure, they've all got pros and cons, but if you want the most, the Bmw R1300Gs is still the mostest. Hey you, if you want to become one of the Ride On people, don't forget to subscribe. Ride often, ride carefully, ride on.